What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Eno Sarris of The Athletic, here to talk all things baseball, but specifically fantasy baseball, my favorite fantasy sport of all fantasy sports that is right around the corner. So, Eno, happy almost opening day in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already drafting, so it's time to go.
I imagine you're drafting like how quickly after one season ends until you're starting your fantasy baseball process?
I did start a draft at the Arizona Fall League, so that was beginning of November.
Okay. Do I
I
want
don't.
to know how many leagues you're in?
I try to keep it down. I think this year, hopefully under 15.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to talk fantasy baseball. As I joked with you right before starting, you don't only care about fantasy baseball. You do care about baseball. You've got a podcast you write over at The Athletic. And you're one of the people that I enjoy reading because you think about baseball maybe differently than the average fan might think about baseball. And so it's helpful to talk about that, but also fantasy and sort of how reality and fantasy may be combined. So, let's just jump right in. One of the things that as I was looking at some of the stuff that you've put out, I like that you've got starting pitching rankings that are sort of, how would you say, like infused with stuff plus. You use stuff plus in your rankings. How would you describe maybe how your rankings are different than some other places?
Yeah, well, I've been working on this metric stuff plus since 2008, 2009. So it's been a long time coming. And it's just basically a way to look at pitchers' stuff, their physical characteristics of their pitches. What we found is if you use that in your projections, you can better project how much how many homers a pitcher gives up, how many hits a pitcher gives up. You can do better projections. So it has stuff in it, but it also has these sort of projections that come off of it. And then, I just look around for the best research. One of my friends, Jeff Zimmerman, does work on health grades. So I throw that in. And then I have the guys over at Baseball Prospectus have been working on arsenal metrics, which are sort of like how the pitches fit together. How many different pitches do you have? How different are they?
Yeah.
Do you have like big difference in shapes, or are they kind of fastball slider?
Yeah.
And so I try to use all of those aspects to kind of come up with the best modern rankings I can come up with.
Okay. Well, as Dodger fans will look through your rankings, they will not be surprised to find five guys highly ranked in your system. They have five of the top 24 pitchers in there. I'm curious. I imagine there's sort of a calculation on these rankings, and then there's your own personal sort of like eye test. I imagine that gets placed in here somewhere. You've got Snell at 13, Glass now at 15, and then I find most interesting Otani, Sasaki, and Yamamoto right one after another, 22, 23, and 24. I'm curious, just setting aside the fantasy piece, does anything surprise you about kind of how those five guys rank? Like, is that how you would rank those five pitchers in real life, do you think?
I think so. I think the one thing that comes to mind with Dodgers in particular that's so difficult is the amount of innings you're going to get from
Yeah.
them, and I think like the first thing that people think of is like the jokes. Oh, the Dodgers can't keep people healthy. It's not that necessarily. They're going to go to a 6-man rotation, so even if
Yeah.
they're healthy all year, like I have Snell, mostly healthy, and I have projected for about 140 innings. Because if you do a 6-man rotation, there's just the innings aren't there to be
Yeah.
to go around. And another thing is the Dodgers are really excellent at developing depth. So Landon Knack, Ben Kasparius, when they come back, River Ryan, Emmett Sheehan, like all these guys, they're really good at developing depth. So if they need to give them a preventative blow, they usually have a guy that can come up. Landon Knack is perfect for like, oh, we need a spot starter type idea.
Yeah.
And so they're gonna, whenever possible, they're gonna be careful because they're gonna be there in October, and they'd rather have those guys in October than in August. And so that's something that's fantasy related, that's not regular related. And so in fact, I may have them higher as a group even if it was real,
Got it.
because I would know, oh, I have replacements for them, when they're in there. Like on a per inning basis, it's the best pitching staff in baseball. It's just a question of how the innings are going to be, allocated that makes it interesting for fantasy. And then on top of that, sorting through them, one thing is the Dodgers were an early adopter of Stuff Plus. They have, I'm sure they have whatever they have is better than mine. And you can kind of see that in the way they put their staff together. But on top of that, like, they're all different pitchers and they all have their different risks. Like Shohei Ohtani, kind of a second elbow surgery. Roki Sasaki, apparently, I don't know if it was a misdiagnosis or what it was, but there was a threat of Tommy John when he was in Japan. And Tyler Glasnow, there's good news on that elbow, but like you always feel like any of these guys could just be out for the year,
Totally.
So that's the risk. And that's maybe one of the hardest parts about putting together a ranking and discussing how things are. Like if you're discussing real life, though, the Dodgers have the replacements if these guys get hurt. And so that's why they're, I think probably the best pitching staff in baseball.
Just out of curiosity, setting aside fantasy for a second, as a guy who follows baseball, covers baseball, like how does this rotation compare to, any rotation we've seen in your estimation in the last 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, the one team that sort of comes to mind is the Mariners, just because they've developed these guys. They've had a little bit more bulk to their guys,
Yeah.
But it's really hard because that park is so good to their pitchers, and they have kind of big splits home and away. And so, in terms of once you take that park effect off, the Padres, when they had their best, starting rotation, it was pretty good. I grew up in Atlanta. Do we have, 3 future Hall of Famers in this list? Maybe, maybe not. So like,
maybe not all as pitchers in the case of Shohei Ohtani.
Right, exactly, right. Yeah, so Maddox, Glavine, Smoltz is still kind of the gold standard of rotations when I think about it. But this is amazing. It's just a great rotation, and power, breaking balls, change ups, lefty, righty, and it's a little bit different. Like, people overestimate, like, oh, would Maddox be good today? And I'm like, yeah, Maddox probably sat 93 at his peak, and the rest of the league wasn't throwing as hard. So to say he's a soft tosser is wrong.
Yeah.
But they generally, as a group, did not throw as hard as this group. I mean, this is high velocity stuff.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you ask the Hall of Fame thing, because obviously Clayton Kershaw, when healthy, will be the number 6 starter on this team.
Right.
So you could really screw with people by asking how many Hall of Famers in this group, because it's like, well, Kershaw's not really in the top 5, and Ohtani, will definitely be a Hall of Famer. How much?
That's right. So there are 2 Hall of Famers in this rotation, at least.
Well, and then and I'm not going to sit here and project anybody, but you've got a guy in Snell who's already won 2 Cy Youngs, and then Sasaki and Yamamoto. Who knows where their careers go?
Yeah, that's true.
With Roki Sasaki, how hard is it to place a guy like this into a fan? I mean, setting aside health, setting aside how many innings the Dodgers actually give him, all of that stuff. How hard is it for you guys to project and then rank a guy like Roki Sasaki?
We have some of his stuff metrics from the WBC. But one of the things that was tough about that was they came out, a lot of them were doing 3-inning stints.
Yeah, right.
So, he was throwing hundos. Like, he was sitting 99 in the WBC. He's not going to sit 99 this year,
Yeah.
And then we have some metrics from Japan, but they're a little bit inconsistent park to park. So, some of those metrics aren't as maybe good across the board as they might be if we had gotten them in American parks. But what we do see generally from Sasaki also is that, like, if he had come over before this last season, he would have had all the best metrics, like the best stuff, the best fastball velocity, the best strikeout rates in Japan, the best strikeout minus walk rates in Japan, the best ERA in Japan. He would have been the best Japanese pitcher who came over. Now it's possible he's just in the group of the best, because he did have a step down. I mean, he dropped to 96 ish. From 97, 98, so he dropped 2 miles an hour off his fastball, The shape of his fastball changed a little bit. Now we start thinking, oh, does he have a good feel for spin? His breaking balls aren't that good. His breaking ball dropped down to 83 miles an hour from like 87. So there are some like worries about not only his health, but his stuff now. My comp for him is like a kind of a floor of like a peak Kevin Gossman.
Wow. Okay.
Because, fastball 96, 97 with a good splitter coming off it that he's a good feel for, and maybe a hard time making breaking balls. But that's a bit of a floor for me because he's coming to the Dodgers. Yamamoto didn't have a slider before he came to the Dodgers. So maybe they can give him a good breaking ball. And I don't know who has that full arsenal with a splitter. I mean, Ohtani has two good breaking balls and a good splitter and throws 97. So he could be Ohtani-esque,
Yeah. For you, I'm curious, are any of these guys that you're sort of actively pursuing yourself in fantasy drafts, or because of the injury risk, because of the lack of innings pitched, are you sort of letting other people take one of these 5 guys and going elsewhere for yourself?
Well, one thing I've been trying to do is be really conservative with my health with my first pitcher. So I like a guy like Corbin Burns or Zach Wheeler or Logan Gilbert as my first pitcher, just because I feel like I'm going to get maybe 170, 180 innings, and it feels like pretty good health wise. But if you do that, especially if you get a guy like Corbin Burns, other guys might be taking Garrett Crochet and Chris Sale and getting more strikeouts from their first pitcher. I'm going to go conservative with my first pitcher, and that opens me up for taking one of these guys as my second pitcher. Now, if I'm getting Glasnow or Snell or Roki as my second pitcher, that covers up maybe having a little fewer strikeouts for my first guy. And if they're both healthy, then I'm like, you can win the league kind of thing. But I call it the YOLO yo-yo.
Okay.
So I try to be conservative, and then I try to go YOLO. So I kind of try to pair the two so that I don't get into trouble where like my first pitcher is Garrett Crochet and my second pitcher is Tyler Glasnow, and it's like May and I've got no pitchers.
Yeah, exactly. You're the Dodgers. You're just the Dodgers in real life if you draft like that. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Quickly on strategy, because I do find this interesting. One thing that's great about fantasy baseball is the variety of strategies. Last year, I remember reading up personally on kind of somebody who said, hey, I just go like all hitters early in drafts because hitters are way less injury risk. They're way more predictable. And then sort of taking some flyers in the end. By the way, shout out to you because Seth Lugo was on my fantasy baseball team last year, and he turned out to be a great like 20th round pick or whatever he was. This year, from just a big picture strategy, as you look at kind of who the hitters are, who the pitchers are, is there like a strategy that maybe is more appealing to you this year in drafts than it would have been in other years?
The teams are spreading their saves around a little bit more, and you're going to have a guy who has 25 and then a guy behind him who has 12 or 15. And, it's a little bit like the running back situation in football where they're kind of sharing all the touches. And the more they do that, the more it doesn't make sense for me to invest at the very, very top. So I'm trying to get one of the last great relievers that I think is really good, but it doesn't cost as much. And that ends up being a lot of times Joan Duran from the Twins, Andres Munoz from the Mariners. Those guys are going to strike 30% of the guys out they see. They're going to get 22 to 25 saves. Maybe it'll be a couple less than the top guys, but I will have paid a lot less. And when you don't take a closer in the top 4 or 5 rounds, that lets you take like 4 bats and a good arm, and then you get your closer, and then you can still feel like, hey, I got an ace that's like as good as anybody else's ace. I got a reliever that's good as anybody else's reliever, and my 4 bats are pretty strong.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say relief pitchers are probably the one area where if you're sort of just a general fantasy baseball fan, you probably hate what the Dodgers did this offseason because they took a handful of guys who were good closers elsewhere, as well as a couple guys. I mean, they have 4 guys that like a year ago in Kopech, Phillips, Yates, and Scott were all basically projected closers. And so now you took 4 closers, now they have 0 closers if you're the Dodgers. I know they've said Tanner Scott's going to get them, but I would personally
and I think Tanner is actually
of
a
any of
great
these.
pick in that way because
Yeah.
he's a little bit like my Munoz and Duran. Like I think he's going to get to 20 saves. Yeah,
This is Tanner
Kopech.
Scott.
Yeah, I think Kopech will get 10 to 15 when he's
Yeah.
healthy, and Phillips will get a few. But like if you end up the season with Tanner Scott with like a 2.29 ERA and 30% strikeout rate and 22 saves, like you did fine.
Yeah.
That was a good pickup.
I was pissed. I had Michael Kopech in a keeper league, and he became the closer at the end of last season, and I was feeling great about things. And now he's like, sixth on the depth chart as far as closers
Oh my
go. So
god! I've got a
bad news
keeper
there.
league where it's like tied to numbers, like tied to salaries, and I had a cheap Kopech, Ben Joyce, and Lucas Urseg, and I was like, I'm doing great, dude. I got 3 cheap closers, and I was like, I got 2, I got 1, I
Yeah,
got 0.
it's
Oh
tough.
well.
It's tough. Let's talk on the hitter side. One thing, if you're a Dodgers fan and you're drafting in fantasy, all of the risks that come with drafting pitchers that are Dodgers, i.e., 6-man rotation, injury risk, etc. You don't really have to worry about any of that. The hitters, it's a free for all. It's guys who are all going to score a bunch of runs, get a bunch of RBIs, etc. And kind of, I would say probably sort of a bunch of guys who are going to be draftable. Obviously, the Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freemans of the world at the top. Will Smith, Max Muncy, Conforto, Teoscar Hernandez, like all of these guys are guys that presumably Tommy Edman potentially, I mean, he's more of a defensive guy than offense, but you've got guys who could potentially be drafted. Without getting into specifically where guys are ranked, which of the Dodgers hitters are maybe guys that you're targeting and or staying away from at their current value, I should say?
Yeah. Actually, I kind of like Edmund a little bit
Okay.
because he's going to give you defensive versatility, which is important in fantasy, so you can play him at short or in the outfield. He's going to give you double-digit homers and steals, and I think the reason he's kind of on this is to be. I'll be interested to see where he hits, but I think he'll be lower in the lineup actually,
Yeah.
and that's where he kind of was in the playoffs, if I remember correctly. And one of the reasons he was the MVP of that series was if you put a guy with a high contact rate behind, Freeman, Betts, Otani, and Teoscar, that means he's always going to have people on base, and it's
Yeah.
just going to be an RBI machine, I think.
Yeah.
It'll even help his batting average because if he hits a fly out with nobody on base, then that's an out. If he hits a fly out with a guy on third, that's an RBI, and it's not an out for his batting average.
Yeah.
So, he's a guy I like. I'm really interested in Mookie Betts's, how I wonder how healthy he was throughout the season last year, because you saw some decline in his bat speed over the course of the season, and you saw some decline in his power. But if there was a health related, issue there,
Yeah.
then I could see him rebounding this year, and putting together a better year, being more like he was in the first month last season than he was, in the second half.
Speaking of positional versatility, what is Mookie Betts showing up in most places as? Is it as a shortstop? Is it a second baseman? Is it an outfielder? Is it all of the above?
Shortstop and outfield is usually based on last year. So
Okay.
that's the only weird thing from a real life perspective for me about these Dodgers is that Mookie's not a great shortstop for me,
Yeah.
and I guess Edmund maybe not either. So it's a little bit of a pain point for them. I think the signing of Hae-Seung Kim was a little bit like, let's be elite defensively on that side if we're not
Yeah.
going to be elite defensively on the other side.
Yeah. And by the way, it looks like on Yahoo, he is a second baseman, shortstop, and outfielder. So talking about another
Second
guy
base too.
who's
Yeah.
got some positional versatility there. Let me ask you about a couple of the guys. I think it'd be pretty easy to be like, how good is Shohei Ohtani going to be? Is Freddie Freeman going to continue to just hit? I want to talk about a couple guys that maybe, I won't say fringes, but are more interesting to me. And I want to start with Will Smith. Catching for a long time was a position that you better get one of the top 2 or 3. Otherwise, you're going to get a guy that you sort of have to hate looking at his stat line every single day when you pull up your team. It feels like it's gotten deeper. And then in the midst of that, you've got a guy, Smith, who over the last 6 or 7 years, you can make a case has been the best catcher in baseball, and yet continues to falter at the back half of seasons. The Dodgers can obviously afford to rest him more than maybe some other catchers. So what's your outlook on Will Smith for the 2025 season?
Yeah, I really like him because, what happens at catcher, is that there are some teams in your draft room that really value them and will take them, high. And then there's some teams that say, oh, I'm just going to wait and get the last guy.
Yeah.
I'm going to get Gabriel Moreno or Tyler Stevenson. I'll be fine. And what happens is that Will Smith falls between the two. I think he's projected to be the third or fourth best catcher in baseball this year, and he's going as the sixth or seventh or eighth even best catcher. I mean, he's going behind Yainer Diaz. He's going behind Cal Raleigh, who's going to hit 230. And I think he's boring to people.
Yeah.
They're like, is he going to help me in batting average? Not necessarily. Is he going to help me in homers? Not necessarily. Is he steal bases? No. Is he going to be a guy like William Contreras who gets 600 plate appearances? No. But he's actually really good at everything. He's like, for batting average for a catcher, he's really good. And for, he makes contact, he walks, he hits for power. And yeah, sometimes it's uneven. One thing that I found that was kind of interesting was that catchers as a group are like 20 plus % worse than league average in the playoffs. Like all catchers in the playoffs. During the regular season, they're like 5% worse. Catchers are not as good offensively, that we know that, but they suffer the most in the playoffs.
Interesting.
They're tired.
Yeah,
they're tired. We ask catchers to do more than anybody else, and so it doesn't surprise me. I bet you if I looked at first and second half splits for catchers, that they're as a group they'd be worse in the second half. So I don't know if you can leverage that for your fantasy leagues. I think it's just. You just stick Will Smith in there all year, and maybe it won't look great at certain times, but it'll be fine. At the end of the year, you'll look up and you'll get a 250 batting average of 20 homers and 80 RBI, and that's going to be probably a top 5 catcher.
Okay, last guy I want to ask you about is Michael Conforto. He's a fascinating case as a guy who, many people that watch our show know the splits of what he did in San Francisco versus what he did in every stadium that was not in San Francisco. It was like 20 home runs outside of San Francisco, 2 home runs inside of San Francisco, something like that. He comes to the Dodgers. He's going to be in a way better lineup. He's going to be surrounded by better hitters, more opportunities to score, more opportunities to knock guys in, not to mention just the Dodgers developmentally, potentially being able to help him the same way they helped Teoscar Hernandez and others. What do you see as Conforto? Like, is he I don't know if he's probably not like deep enough to qualify as like a sleeper, but from my perspective, he feels like a type of guy that could very well outperform kind of where he ends up ranked in most places.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you can tell from max EV, like maximum exit velocity, is something that's tied to it's tied best to bat speed. The bat speed in it are like you basically are seeing bat speed. It's an easy way to see bat speed. And what you can see from Michael Conforto last year is that he hit a ball harder than he'd hit since he'd had the shoulder surgery. So I think he's got that bat speed back. We don't have historical bat speed, back to before he had surgery. But I think what he's done is he's gotten his bat speed back. And one thing he told me was that he used to be a one-handed finish guy. Then he had shoulder on the front shoulder. He had a right shoulder surgery, and he couldn't finish with 2 hands anymore. Or not that he couldn't, but that he didn't trust himself to finish with one hand anymore. Because that's like fully swinging, and then what if it pops out again? And I wonder if I think Cody was the back shoulder. I think Cody Bellinger was the back shoulder.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But in any case, he changed his swing. Like he went to a 2-handed finish because he was worried about it. And he said late in 23 and beginning of 24, I'm going to a one-handed finish again. Yeah. So I just see a guy who trusts his shoulder again. He had the second best barrel rate of his career, the second best max EV of his career. Like he's healthy again, and he's a real tough out. Like he's a guy who can go the other way and pull, and he can take a walk, and he can punish you. And what I like is that he's not on the Teoscar front where he's kind of swinging a lot,
Yeah.
But he's not a Max Muncy either, where he's not swinging at all. So he kind of maybe he's just that Goldilocks porridge was right in the middle.
Love it. And it was Bellinger's front shoulder. It was his right shoulder that he popped out.
See, I think generally that's worse for you.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's good for Shohei because Shohei is the back shoulder.
Yes. Yes. Well, sweet. Well, I know you guys have tons of stuff coming out. Let me just sort of give you a couple of the boilerplate fantasy questions that we love to ask people like you, which is, we'll set all the Dodgers stuff aside. Um, who's one pitcher that who's the Seth Lugo of 2025, the guy that people can find at almost the very end of their drafts, but who might end up sticking around on their roster all year. And then one hitter maybe as well. That's kind of a sleeper, somebody you like maybe more than others.
Yeah, I can do the pitcher really quickly, but I'm going to get one of my leagues up so that I can answer the other question for you too. But the pitcher, I'm a big fan of Grant Holmes in Atlanta. I think he's got a rotation spot and he's got two good breaking balls, and he really showed a lot last year. I also really like Jose Soriano in Anaheim. Sits 100 on the sinker. And I know he may not get a ton of wins out of that, where he's at, but he's got a really good splitter that I think he can throw more often. He's got two good breaking balls, so there's a real breakout possibility there. Grant Holmes is more of like just a guy, more like a Lugo pick. Soriano is the kind of guy who could break or could just like be the dude that just breaks out next year. So.
Well, Holmes was a former Dodgers first round pick, so there you go. You gave us an old friend alert in the sleeper category on the pitcher side.
Another little funny story about him was that when I asked him what changed so much when you got to Atlanta, and he said they taught me a slider, and I said a slider.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, there's that.
Great hair in Grant Holmes, by the way, as well. So
that's true.
Not that counts in fantasy baseball, unfortunately, but
reminds me of my old hair. The on the hitter side, I don't know, a guy that I think is been available and interesting that's falling a little bit is Seiya Suzuki.
Okay.
And I know he has had a little bit of an issue staying healthy in the past few years. But one thing that he does that's really interesting is he steals bases, he hits homers, and the underlying numbers in terms of how hard he hits the ball. Like he hits the ball really hard, 115.5 last year. It's like 2 miles an hour harder than Conforto. Wow. So, he hits the ball really hard. He has a really good sense of the zone, and he stole 16 bases last year. Like there's a dark horse ability for like a 30-20 season out of him.
Yeah.
And the nice part other than that is just with that on base ability, with the offense around him, he's going to, I think, provide good runs and RBI, and just be a solid across the board contributor that goes too late.
I love it. Well, that's another guy that we talked about a bunch on our show because he was a guy that when, wasn't sure if Teoscar Hernandez was going to be coming back to LA and Suzuki was maybe or maybe not available for trade.
Yeah.
He was a name in the mix. So Seiya Suzuki, Grant Holmes, we love it. Let us know, folks know all the stuff that you guys have over at The Athletic. I'm not just saying it because you're here. The Athletic is my favorite place to go for fantasy baseball writing, but also customizable rankings, the stuff plus pitcher rankings like you do. So let folks know everything that's happening over on your site.
Yeah, we're ramping up right now. The pitcher rankings are up, and they've got a bunch of goodies on there. If you become a subscriber, there's a Google Doc that, like I'm about to put minor league stuff plus numbers in there for subscribers. And coming up through this week, it's sleeper week. So we are using the staff that we got, a really cool staff. Our guy, John Legeza, is up for 4 Fantasy Sports Writing Association awards, including Best Football Writer and Best Baseball Writer. So we're going to leverage our staff and just ask each of us for a sleeper for hitters, pitchers, relievers, and that's going to be what's up all week this week.
I love it. And I know last week you guys had some great stuff. I shouldn't say last week, maybe it was even older. But I love that you go back and reanalyze, like, here were my starting pitching rankings from last year, and here's what I missed, and here's what I learned. And so if you're not already, go ahead, check out The Athletic. We have a bunch of folks, Andy McCullough, Fabian Ardaya, regulars on our show. So we love the stuff that you guys do. That is Eno Sarris. You can find him on social media everywhere. Rates and Barrels podcast as well. And, of course, over at The Athletic. So, Eno, thank you, and enjoy the this is prime fantasy baseball drafting season. So I know you've drafted some teams, but enjoy the next few weeks.
I'm gonna wait till after Valentine's Day to start my next draft, but yeah, it's time to go. Thanks for
Well,
having
hey,
me.
here's a question we debate in our league. Ask you this on the way out. Do you need to have your fantasy draft scheduled before the Dodgers and Cubs play in Japan, well before the rest of the season? This was a hot debate in my league.
I like to wait as long as possible to do my drafts, but I think you got to do it before that day because those are stats,
That's what I'm talking about.
and if they happen already, then you can have people just drafting a guy for his stats in games that already happened, which is kind of gross.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. All right, everybody. We appreciate you watching again. This is DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. I am Jeff Spiegel. That is Eno Sarris. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. And as always, go Dodgers.